I'm Ed Kelley, editor of the Oklahoman. An obscure preacher's plans to burn the Koran has drawn a lot of publicity and condemnation. But what does it mean in our nation's dialogue about constitutional rights? To answer that question and more is Mark Green, national editorial writer for the Oklahoman and a frequent contributor on newsok.com. Mark, as you know, Reverend Terry Jones in Gainesville, Florida, now is saying he won't burn copies of the Koran on Saturday, at least for now. Meantime, he claims backers of an Islamic center near Ground Zero in New York have agreed to move that project, but that was denied by Islamic Center's supporters. What do you make of this confusing circumstances surrounding the preacher's apparent retreat?
Well, it is confusing. You've got the preacher, Terry Jones, coming out in a press conference situation and saying that he's got a deal to have the Islamic Center in New York City moved away from Ground Zero, and then almost immediately the project's backers say, no, that's not the case. We've just agreed to sit down and talk. You know, the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Maybe there's misunderstanding, but clearly I think that the preacher has been feeling the heat. You know, President Obama and others have joined in, and there's pretty strong chorus on him to not do this. And I think maybe the weight of this, maybe he achieved his point, which was to gain publicity, but the weight of it now seems to have made him back off.
Well, before he changed his mind, General David Petraeus said burning copies of the Koran would make things harder for our troops fighting al-Qaeda. Now, as you know, a Kansas congregation known for picketing the funerals of slain servicemen reportedly says it will burn the Koran if Jones's congregation doesn't. Mark, do you think this kind of demonstration really hurts the U.S. military effort?
Well, it certainly doesn't help. Look, nobody's under any illusion that the United States is going to be popular and warmly embraced in that part of the world, at least not for some time to come. Not even President Obama's overtures to the Muslim world seem to have changed the fundamental dynamic there at all. But anything that doesn't help the troops hurts them, and these kinds of displays just harden feelings over there and make the troops' job harder, especially when they're trying to, as they did in Iraq. You know, they spent a lot of time in Iraq trying to engender goodwill with tribal leaders and so forth, and this kind of thing is not going to help that kind of effort in Afghanistan.
Mark, you mentioned it that Reverend Jones's plans drew a lot of condemnation from the president all the way to Sarah Palin. New York City's Mayor Michael Bloomberg was pretty much alone in defending the preacher's right to freely express himself, no matter how odious the manner. Yet, when the controversy involves an Islamic center near Ground Zero in New York, all the talk is about respecting constitutional rights. Do you think there's a double standard here of sorts?
Well, I think there's something there. I don't know. I mean, maybe giving Reverend Jones too much credit to say that he was trying to raise this as an issue, the double standard issue. From everything that I read about him, the things that he said about this stunt, as President Obama called it, that's now been called off, at least temporarily. His point was more on a religious thing. He and his followers consider Islam a false religion. They want to make a point about it, and people like that almost always choose some kind of a blunt instrument to make that point. But the larger issue is that there is a lot of lecturing and hectoring that goes on. We've seen it with the Ground Zero Mosque controversy and now with this, and it does seem to be one way. And I think that if anything that's broader than Reverend Jones, he does speak to a frustration that a lot of Americans feel, and they sense that the calls for tolerance and respect and those sorts of things seem to only go one way. And again, I don't ascribe that kind of a higher motive to this particular fellow or the Kansas group or any of the others that are lining up to get into this controversy, but there is something to that, I think.
Okay, Mark, thanks. Well done. News OK is your source for more news on plans to burn the Koran.